this year is Canada's 150th, and our friends at the Calgary Zoo are celebrating Canadian animals. We're here at the zoo today to find out more about our country's most amazing and iconic native species. Well, they were once known to range across the prairies. Now, grizzly bears have been classified as endangered. Can you tell us a little bit more, Sarah, about these endangered, beautiful giants?
Absolutely. So I'm going to look at where they are. Really does have a lot to do with what their endangered status is. So here in Alberta, they are on the threatened list. So that usually means we're in maybe 500 animals in our province. That is significantly reduced from what their historical population was. The good news about grizzlies is that if you give them the space, if you make sure that they have that space, that they can sustain a population. So great stuff happening in our national parks with those overpasses, the hunting ban, that's been a really important feature as well, and like just great hunting community behind it as well. And then, of course, this idea as well that we have to connect big pieces of habitat together for these big species. It's one of the reasons that we really like to put energy behind campaigns for conservation for big iconic species like that. We call them an umbrella species. They need a lot of space. So if you preserve space for them, everybody that shares that space with them benefits too, right? So they're a really good focus species. And of course, they're really quite charismatic and beautiful, and it's not a hard sell, right? They're gorgeous animals. Fun things here that I love watching for. I kind of feel like grizzly bears just can't stop renovating. Like they're just constantly, they've got these huge digging claws and this big hump of muscle on their back, and they're just always like, a hole there, yeah, that would look great. You know, so they're just, and you'll see them, this is the best part. They actually make little holes, and then they put that big bear bum in there, and they just like lie back. So fun to watch. So that's something you have a very good chance of seeing, because that's one of their main behaviors, digging.
I can dig it.
Yeah.
Well, the bison, the largest terrestrial animal in North America. What can you tell us about the bison? I know you got a lot to say.
These are pretty exciting. Okay, so yeah, huge animal. Part of the really dramatic story of them, obviously, is that the European settlers wiped them right out. So we were looking at possibly 50 million or more on the plains, and then an even larger population that was in the more boreal area, so northern forest. Both of them, serious overhunting that happened. And again, this is back before we had good conservation ethics, but it's pretty impressive what humans can do when we're, not taking care of things. So the good news story here is that you can bring animals that were right at the brink of extinction, you can get them back. You have to watch the genetics, right? Because you're bottlenecking down, there's not only a few individuals left, but it was actually a bunch of zoos and also some ranchers. So throughout the States and Canada, these tiny little herds, and because they did this really aggressive and strategic breeding, which is actually what a lot of that we base our conservation breeding on, that kind of idea, that concept, they're back. Now, they're nowhere near their original numbers, but this year they introduced plains bison back into Banff National Park. That's 100 years without them. Incredibly important species, like what they do in terms of, we call it keystone, right? They are one of those species that it affects everything in the ecosystem, right? So really, really important that they're back, but also First Nations, extremely important culturally too, that we are reestablishing, and this is a sacred animal for many, many First Nations people. So it's another side of that story as well. Yeah.
Well, the gray wolf. Now, many of us can't help but think of the howl of a wolf when we're reminded of the call of the wild. The gray wolf, a beautiful, iconic animal. Sarah, what else are they known for?
Teamwork. Yeah, you're looking at one of the major carnivores that is also a social animal. And there's actually only a handful of those that were known for that. There are some individuals that are solitary, but they are super intelligent. And you do see that correlated with animals that are really, really social. Part of the brain has to be fairly large to be able to read all these little social nuances and where is my place in the pack? How am I expected to relate to this member of the pack versus that one? And the other side too, which I think humans probably really get interested in, is the fact that there's so much cooperation in raising the young and in bringing down prey. There's some pretty sophisticated strategies that wind up happening when they're looking at taking down something like a moose, say, that's so much bigger than they are. Really? So yeah, very fascinating. If you go and watch our wolves here, you can actually tell who is, higher in status. It's at position of their tail. So the higher up your tail, the more status you have, right, in the pack structure. And you'll see, like, by degrees. Yeah, there's lots of them. Yes, it's kind of fun to watch.
So talk a little bit about the conservation status of these beautiful animals.
Okay, so wolves are very much like bears. It depends where you are, right? So overall, they're not considered endangered. They are what we call a species of least concern if we look at them globally.
Okay.
However, they're also one of those animals that needs a lot of space, and habitat is shrinking rapidly. So there are areas where they are completely gone. We are in a pretty good shape up here in Canada in most spaces. Our big challenges with wolves, a lot of it is how are humans using this space and how are we making room for these big carnivores? So for example, ranchers have valid concerns. We need to work with them to address the conservation side of things, but also supporting an important industry too. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. It's, I guess, the political science aspect of conservation science, but it can't be ignored. Really important.
Well, dangerous and beautiful. The cougar is not only a little frightening to me, but they're also a little bit misunderstood and quite reclusive. What else, Sarah?
When you look at how strong they are and their body weight compared to the body weight of their typical prey. So, for example, most of our female cougars are in the 100 to 120 pound range. By herself, that cat can take down a bull elk who might be as much as 1,200 pounds. So the strength is phenomenal. The other cool fact too that I love, because all cats are just brilliant predators, right? If you compare the statistics of hunting success, so let's take tigers, largest cats in the world, about 1 out of every 20 hunting attempts is successful, right?
Really?
Lions, very comparable in size. Social hunters, you're up in your chances, right? 1 out of 10.
Okay.
Do you want to take a guess for cougars? What do you think?
1 out of 6.
8 out of 10 times. Yeah,
Wow.
80% of the time they take down their target.
Wow.
So really, really impressive. Everything. They're just beautiful athletes to watch in motion for sure. Yeah.
What about their conservation?
They are facing very much the same as most of our really big carnivores. They need a lot of space. And when we take away space, that's traditionally where they would have been hunting, and we replace, say, a pasture full of deer with a pasture full of cows, you're asking a lot of that cat to recognize that one belongs to humans and I'm not supposed to grab that, as opposed to the deer over here, which are fine for me to eat. You're also taking away space that she would have been hunting in.
If people come to the zoo here to check out the cougars, what kind of behavior will they see?
They're one of the best ones to watch because they are they're pretty active. I mean, let's just remind everybody that cats typically sleep 20 hours out of the day, okay? And that's energy conservation, it's not laziness. But these two are rescue animals. Their names are Freya and Odin. They're a brother-sister pair. And there are all these really cool things that are put into their enclosure designed to allow them to just exercise all of the normal predator behaviors, right? So they've got stuff to pounce on. They've got really interesting smells to check out. And the keepers have these schedules of enrichment, we call it. So anything that's going in to make that enclosure feel new and exciting, right? That's constantly changing. Every single day there's new items going in. You have such a good chance of seeing not just a cat nap, but really, really fun behaviors.
Well, with no fear of heights and the ability to practically defy gravity, mountain goats are a pretty cool animal, and a lot of people around our area will be familiar with them on their trips up to the mountains. What else maybe people aren't so aware of about these animals?
Yeah, well, actually, I would suggest that most people think they've seen a mountain goat, and they've actually seen a female Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, right? So our provincial mammal. Mountain goats are typically way up high in the alpine, whereas the sheep are the ones that we're typically seeing near the highways. Very closely related, but the goats are a lot bigger. They're not a herd animal, they're solitary.
Okay.
They will only really be found in groups when it's courtship season or when they are maybe raising some babies. You might see a couple of nannies and a couple of their kids together. Part of this has to do with the fact that you've got a really big animal that is subsisting on incredibly small amounts of food that you find in the alpine, right? Like we can't even get up there to hike until what, mid-July if we're lucky half the time, and it's still, there's a ton of snow cover. And these are vegetarians, right? Like they have to find some way to sustain themselves. So that's always been something that's just boggled my mind, how this animal, that the size of it, that it can subsist on so little caloric intake. But we're already seeing very worrisome changes in trophic levels. So where you are on the food chain, how much food is produced or consumed at each level, when we're seeing a big decline in certain plant species because glacial melt has done everything from bring down minerals and changing pH of soil, and suddenly there's way more water than there used to be, and this plant species is what this goat needs to have to survive, and suddenly it's not there anymore. They only have so many places they can go that's in that high elevation range that's meeting the same need. What you hope is that there are certain species that will be able to find little niches that will answer that same, or they will adapt and find a food that will still answer that same need. But it is, it's a huge concern. Yeah, and that's why so many scientists are going, hey guys, we gotta do something about this while we still have the choice about it, right? And that's the idea behind it.
Well, many wildlife photographers have this next animal on their list of must-gets. It's the phantom of the north, the great gray owl. What can you tell us about this beautiful animal?
Well, first of all, good luck finding one because they are incredibly good at camouflage. That's actually one of my favorite things to see at the zoo. We've got this beautiful, it's the Judge Shipley's Rocky Mountain Aviary, where we have 4 of these huge owls. They're the tallest owl species on the continent. They camouflage, like they just melt into the trees. And people will walk through this aviary and they're coming out and they're like, where were the owls? So you have to actually like teach them how to sort of look up and down the trunks and figure out how they're camouflaging. So it's kind of cool to see that. Silent flight, of course, as well. It's something that helps them overcome the defenses of their prey. So lots of rodents, really good hearing. That overcomes that defense, right? So it's makes them a significant predator rodents, so really important part of the ecosystem, rodent control. The other part that I think is kind of funny, they've got everyone fooled. They're actually incredibly scrawny birds, but they're super puffy. So they look huge, but yeah, they're not anywhere near as heavy or as strong as the great horned owl, which is significantly shorter.
Where do they sit on the conservation scale?
Their population is sustainable. It's least concern. However, they are another one because they're so specialized to that northern forest existence. As we see temperatures changing and we're seeing the ripple effect up the food chain, they are very susceptible. Because again, as the higher up you go, you tend to become what we call an indicator species. So it's going to hit you faster and harder. We're going to see all of a sudden less and less of you.
Well, it wasn't long ago that this next animal was literally on the brink of extinction. Less than 24, you said, whooping cranes. We've all heard about their conservation issues. What else can you tell us about this animal?
I think they are, we call them like the comeback kid, right? So they're a long distance migratory bird.
Okay.
They absolutely need these resting spots on their migration route that are wetlands. Wetlands, we lost about 80% of them in 100 years. They were also being hunted at that time, so turn of the last century, it was very en vogue to have all sorts of different feathers in your hat, literally. So they were big birds, snowy white feathers, so they were really into that. And then on top of that, we also are looking at a very slow reproductive rate.
Okay.
So these factors made them really vulnerable, and sure enough, like all of a sudden there's only a few left. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Scientists got involved. There's been incredible science here at our zoo with other factors like how often do you have to turn an egg to make sure that the chick survives inside, right? Like we have a robot egg that calculates everything from how much warmth is needed at different areas, how much moisture is lost. And the important takeaway here, this is science that we can use on other species, right? So we're looking at an international effort. We now have almost 500 birds now, which is, again, when you look at, a lot of people had written them off. They were like, this isn't gonna happen. And it was touch and go for a while, but the other side of it too, there's been a major recognition of how important wetlands are. So little bits like that, all these little pieces of the pie getting built back, you can bring them back. So, hope is not lost. We're not going off the edge yet. And that's the other side of it. Like we have all the means of turning these things around.
Well, many people have never even heard of, let alone seen, the largest member of the squirrel family. It's the Vancouver Island marmot. What can you tell us about this species? I must admit, I have never seen one.
And I'm not surprised. First of all, they at one point, they might still have this title. I think they might have just been pushed out, but they were the most endangered mammal in Canada. The other part is that they're what we call an endemic species. That means you are only going to find this species in one particular place. That makes them very vulnerable to getting punted onto that endangered list because there's nowhere else to pull them from if we're trying to reestablish populations. So that was obviously when we're seeing the decline of their population, that was a big concern that we actually had to grab some from the wild and do a captive breeding initiative to get those populations back up. They are very closely related. Most people have seen marmots, the hoary marmot in our Rocky Mountains. So as you get into the higher alpine, you'll often hear them. They have a really piercing whistle that they give as a warning or alarm call. Okay. They're incredibly cute. Like they're really fluffy and cute. So it's not like snakes where it's maybe a harder call for conservation. Everyone's like, oh. The success has actually been pretty decent. There's definitely still a lot more work that needs to be done. But, again, numbers are up, and the whole idea is that it's just pushing them back up a little bit.
Well, another animal that is unfortunately a victim of habitat loss, agricultural method changing. What can you tell us about the burrowing owl?
Well, they are one of the cutest owl species you will ever see. They are on our big list of grasslands animals that are having a really hard time. So you're looking at the #1 most endangered ecosystem in North America. It's easy to plow it, it's easy to pave it, it's easy to build things on it. So grasslands are disappearing at crazy rates, and these guys are really sensitive little species. They are mostly insect eaters, believe it or not. They're very good at catching crickets and grasshoppers, which of course are also something that gets sprayed for. So there is a pesticide potential for poisoning there. Bigger than that though is, again, going back to in endangered species issues, you're looking at mortality rate, but also reproduction. What's going on there if we're not having any babies born or hatched in this case? They're not actually a true burrower. They borrow burrows from other animals. So say a badger or maybe ground squirrels have left behind a nice big den. They've moved somewhere else. That's where you're gonna find your burrowing owls. And that's what they need to successfully raise chicks. So we built artificial burrows, and they've been tested in several places. Some in Alberta. We also did a test site in BC as well. And yeah, they're again, that was the game changer. I think you're going to find quite a few of these grassland species have become major focus points for the Calgary Zoo. And then also looking at, say, the greater sage grouse, so that sagebrush natural grassland spaces are, again, it's the habitat that's threatened, and it's those big species there that are winding up really paying the price for it. So this is us needing to ask the people who are using the land for other things, can we leave some space for wildlife? But also, as a society, do we ask those people to bear the brunt of conservation, or do we all need to chip in for this, right? So what are some creative ways we can do this?
Well, probably the most iconic species when we think about Canada, and especially during the year celebrating its 150th, the beaver. What can you tell us that we don't already know about this animal?
Okay. They are the second largest rodent in the world. So the only one that's bigger is the capybara down in the Amazon. They have, it's the iconic rodent chisel teeth, these huge curving teeth that have enamel only on one side of them. So enamel is one of the hardest substances in nature. Our teeth are completely capped in it. So the dentine inside can't continuously grow. It's capped. But for the rodents, one side of the tooth has the enamel, the other side doesn't. So they have a constant instinct to gnaw really hard things, because if they don't, they actually can get overgrowth of the teeth from the other side. So there's all these little bits that, push them to go chew those trees down. It is also their food source. And then the other side, of course, is that they're brilliant engineers. So you will eventually have a lot of issues if you just let them do everything they want and dam wherever they like. Smart critters too. They will, if they want to build a dam or a lodge in one place and they like the trees in another place a little better, they will actually create transportation canals from one section. Like, this isn't just damming. This is like completely changing the ecosystem to suit their needs. So the damming that they do and the wetland creation that they do creates enormous habitat potential for all sorts of different wetland species. So right there, really important. The other side of it too, these guys were just about wiped off the face of the earth by the fur trade. So it was their pelt that led to most of the European exploration of this continent. And they were only saved by the fickle finger of fashion changing and pointing at something else for a while, right? So those big felted stovetop hats, they wanted, beaver was the perfect pelt for them. So they wiped them almost completely out of Europe, and they were doing it here as well. And they came back, right? Once that pressure's gone, they reestablish. So again, we're going back to the importance of doing lots of case studies in conservation science. When you remove those big factors, you've got every chance for these species to bounce back.
Well, the next time you visit the Calgary Zoo, remember, you're not only getting the opportunity to see some amazing animals, but you're also helping to contribute to the ongoing conservation research of Canadian endangered wildlife. It's been a great day. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to our friends at the Calgary Zoo for having us out for this celebration of Canada's 150th.